The dust settled in a thick golden haze over Redemption Creek. Inside the saloon, the air was heavy with the smell of stale whiskey and sawdust. All eyes were on Eleanor Vance, a young woman in a simple, hand-stitched wedding dress that was far too elegant for this grimy establishment. She stood alone at the center of the room, a picture of hope and nervousness. Her fiancé, a man named Jedediah, was nowhere to be seen. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, turning into snickers and open laughter when Jedediah finally stumbled in, his face red from drink. "Look at her, boys!" he bellowed, pointing a finger. "Thought she could trap old Jedediah. A poor little thing with nothing but that flimsy dress." Eleanor's heart sank. The laughter was a physical blow, a wave of public humiliation that washed over her. Tears welled in her eyes as Jedediah, fueled by alcohol and cruelty, laughed with his friends. She felt a profound loneliness, a hollowness in her chest, as if her future had been ripped away in an instant. She was a bird with clipped wings, exposed and vulnerable. Just as the world seemed to shrink to a point of agonizing shame, a small hand slipped into hers. Eleanor looked down, her tear-filled eyes meeting the solemn gaze of a little girl, no older than 8. The girl, Lily, had hair the color of corn silk and eyes the deep blue of a summer sky. She said nothing, only squeezed Eleanor's hand, a silent gesture of solidarity in a sea of mockery. Lily's father, a tall, rugged man named Elias Thorne, watched from the corner of the room, his face a mask of quiet fury. He had a reputation for being a man who kept to himself, but the sight of his daughter's simple compassion moved him deeply. He stepped forward, his boots heavy against the floor. "Jedediah," Elias's voice was low, cutting through the noise. "You've had your fun. Now leave." Jedediah bristled, his bravado fading slightly in the face of Elias Thorne. "This ain't your business, Thorne. Go back to your ranch." "Eleanor is in my care now," Elias stated, his hand resting on the holster of his revolver. The words were a quiet warning. Jedediah, a coward at heart, knew better than to push a man like Elias. With a final, venomous look at Eleanor, he turned and left, his drunken posse following him out the door. Elias looked at Eleanor, his gaze steady and kind. "Come on," he said softly. "You'll be safe at my ranch." Eleanor, still trembling, could only nod. With Lily's hand in hers and the strong, silent presence of Elias Thorne by her side, she walked out of the saloon, leaving her broken past behind and stepping into an uncertain future. The Thorne Ranch was a sight to behold, a stark contrast to the small, miserable town of Redemption Creek. The main house was a sturdy log cabin, its porch overlooking a vast expanse of golden fields and distant purple mountains. The air was clean, filled with the scent of pine and wild sage. For Eleanor, it was a sanctuary. Elias's life was one of hard work and routine. He rose with the sun, tending to the livestock, mending fences, and ensuring the land was ready for the next season. He was a man of action, not words. He didn't pry into Eleanor's past, nor did he offer false sympathies. He simply gave her a purpose, a reason to get up each day. He taught her to help with the chores, from gathering eggs to helping mend tack. It was a simple, repetitive life, but it was filled with dignity. Lily was the bridge between them. She was a bright, curious child who had lost her mother years ago. She was drawn to Eleanor, finding in her a kind of quiet strength she had never known. Lily would sit with Eleanor on the porch in the evenings, teaching her the names of the constellations and telling her stories about her father's past, simple tales of his kindness and unwavering honor. Eleanor, in turn, read to her from the few books she owned, her voice a soft, soothing melody in the quiet evenings. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Eleanor finally spoke of her past. She told Elias how she had come to Redemption Creek with the hope of a better life, promised to her by a man who turned out to be a cruel fraud. She told him of her poverty and her desperate hope for a new beginning. Elias listened in silence, his expression unreadable. "You're safe here," he said when she finished. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, a promise. The words were few, but they held more weight than any long, flowery speech. Eleanor knew he meant it. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly safe. Eleanor's peace was shattered a few weeks later. The Thorn Ranch was on the outskirts of Elias's rival's land, a man named Sterling Vance. Vance was a ruthless, land-hungry rancher who saw Elias as an obstacle to his ambition. One morning, as Eleanor and Lily were collecting wild berries, they saw two of Vance's ranch hands riding dangerously close to the Thorn property line, their faces hard and sneering. They made a crude remark about Eleanor's new arrangement. Eleanor recoiled, a shiver of fear running down her spine. The outside world, with all its cruelty, was closer than she thought. That same day, Elias and his small crew were out mending a fence when a rider came at a gallop. It was one of Vance's men. He delivered a letter, a thinly veiled threat to Elias to sell up or face the consequences. Elias crumpled the paper in his hand, his jaw tight. The conflict was no longer just about land, it had now become personal, with Eleanor at the center of it. Later that evening, a fierce storm rolled in, a torrent of rain and wind that seemed to mirror the tension at the ranch. The thunder was a drumbeat of approaching danger. Eleanor was restless, worried about Elias. She found him in the barn, his face grim as he checked on the livestock. "Is he going to hurt you?" she asked, her voice small. Elias turned to face her, his eyes, usually so stoic, filled with a hint of concern. "He's going to try," he said simply. "But he won't. I won't let him." The storm raged outside, and inside the barn, a silent understanding passed between them. Eleanor, who had felt so helpless for so long, realized that she had a role to play in this. She wasn't just a burden or a victim. She was a part of this family, and she would stand by them. The next few days were a blur of tension and anticipation. Elias prepared for a confrontation, his movements deliberate and focused. He had his men ride in pairs, and he taught Eleanor how to handle a shotgun, his patience unwavering as he showed her the proper stance and aim. He also made sure Lily was always close to the house, protected. The inevitable clash happened on a bright, windless afternoon. Sterling Vance himself rode up to the Thorn Ranch, flanked by a dozen of his men. The air was thick with the scent of dust and a grim resolve. Elias met him in the yard, his hand on his hip. "Thorn," Vance's voice was a low growl. "I told you to sell. My patience is wearing thin." "This land is mine," Elias replied, his voice calm and steady. "And I'm not selling." Vance's eyes flickered to the cabin where Eleanor and Lily stood on the porch, watching. "And what about your little pet? The one who ran from her wedding? She's a good reason for you to pack up." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The man was a monster, using her past against Elias. But then she felt Lily's small hand slip into hers. Lily's face was defiant, her gaze fixed on Vance. Elias, seeing the look on Vance's face, knew the time for talk was over. "Leave, Vance, now." The confrontation escalated quickly. Vance's men began to close in, and Elias's crew, though outnumbered, stood their ground. A shot was fired, a warning shot into the sky. It was a signal. The ranch hands began to exchange fire, the sound of gunfire echoing across the valley. From the porch, Eleanor, with Lily by her side, watched the chaos. She saw Elias, a man of peace, now a force of nature, protecting his home and family. She raised the shotgun Elias had given her, her hands trembling. She aimed at one of the men trying to flank Elias and fired. The shot went wide, but it was a clear sign. She was not a victim anymore. She was a defender. The unexpected show of force from Eleanor and the unwavering determination of Elias's crew took Vance by surprise. He was used to fighting men who were intimidated, not a family united. Seeing that his surprise attack had failed, and with a few of his men wounded, Vance called a retreat. He left with a final chilling promise to return. The victory was temporary, but it solidified the bond between Elias and Eleanor. In the aftermath of the shootout, a different kind of battle began. Eleanor, seeing the injuries of Elias's men, took charge. She had no formal medical training, but she had a strong will and a natural empathy. She boiled water, tore strips of cloth, and cleaned and bandaged wounds. She worked tirelessly, her movements efficient and her voice a calm comfort. Elias watched her, a new appreciation growing in his heart. She was no longer the fragile bride he had rescued from the saloon. She was a woman of substance and courage. He saw her caring for his men, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes full of determination. He saw her tucking Lily into bed, a gentle hand on her forehead. He saw her not just as a guest, but as a partner. One evening, as she tended to the last of the wounded, Elias found her sitting on the porch, exhausted but satisfied. He sat beside her, the silence between them comfortable and easy. "You've been a great help," he said, his voice quiet. "You have a good heart, Eleanor." "You gave me a chance, Elias," she replied, looking out at the endless expanse of stars. "I was nothing. You gave me a home." "You were never nothing," he corrected her, his voice firm. "You were just a victim of a cruel man. You have a fire inside you." The conversation was simple, but it was a turning point. They talked for hours that night, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes and their fears. Eleanor learned about the loss of Elias's wife, the deep wound it had left on him, and Lily. Elias learned about Eleanor's quiet strength, the resilience that had carried her through a life of hardship. As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened, moving from a platonic understanding to something more profound. It wasn't a sudden, passionate romance, but a slow, gradual coming together, like two rivers merging, each finding strength and purpose in the other. While life at the Thorn Ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm, in town the whispers turned into loud, malicious rumors. Jedediah, humiliated by his public retreat and fueled by jealousy, spread lies about Eleanor, painting her as a conniving woman who had tricked Elias Thorn. Sterling Vance, ever the opportunist, used these rumors to further his agenda, claiming that Elias was a lawless man who harbored criminals. One day, while Elias was in town for supplies, a group of men confronted him, their faces full of suspicion. "Heard you got yourself a little tramp on your ranch, Thorn," one of them sneered. Elias's hand instinctively went to his side. "The woman on my ranch is a good, decent person. The only tramp in this town is the one who ran out on her." The confrontation did not escalate, but the message was clear. The town was turning against them. Elias, a man who had always valued his privacy, now found himself under a public microscope. He returned to the ranch with a heavy heart, concerned for Eleanor's reputation and safety. He didn't care what people thought of him, but he couldn't stand for them to malign her. Eleanor saw the look on his face. He told her everything, his voice a low, frustrated rumble. Eleanor, who had once been so terrified of public opinion, now felt a cold resolve. She had nothing to lose. The only thing that mattered was her new life and the people she loved. "It doesn't matter what they say," she said, her voice steady. "They don't know us. They don't know the truth." Elias looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. He saw her courage, the way she had faced her fears and found a new purpose. It was in that moment that he realized his feelings for her were more than just respect and care. They were love. The bond between Eleanor, Elias, and Lily had become a tangible thing, a fortress against the outside world. They were a family, forged not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual respect. One sunny afternoon, Lily insisted on having a picnic by the creek. Eleanor packed a simple meal of sandwiches and lemonade, and they all walked to the water's edge. As they sat on a checkered blanket, a sense of peace settled over them. Lily, in her innocent way, was the center of their little world. She splashed in the water, her laughter echoing through the trees. Elias watched Eleanor as she watched Lily, a soft smile on her face. "You've brought so much light to this place," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Lily hasn't been this happy since her mother passed." Eleanor's heart ached with a bittersweet joy. "She's a wonderful girl, Elias. She's the one who saved me that day, not you." "She may have taken your hand," Elias said, reaching out to take hers. "But I'm the one who wants to keep it." The moment was simple, unadorned and perfect. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping promises, just two people, bruised by life, finding solace and love in each other's presence. They leaned in and shared a first, tentative kiss, a promise of a future they were both just beginning to believe in. The fragile peace was shattered once more by Sterling Vance. He returned, this time with a formal letter from the land office, claiming that a small portion of Elias's ranch, including the valuable water source, was on disputed territory. It was a flimsy claim, but it was legally binding enough to force a court hearing. Vance presented Elias with an ultimatum. Either he sell his entire ranch to Vance at a ridiculously low price, or Vance would use his influence and power to ensure Elias lost everything in court and would bring a case against Eleanor for fraudulent behavior. The threat was a chilling reminder of the world they had left behind. Elias was a man of the land, and the idea of losing his home, his legacy, was devastating. But even more so was the threat to Eleanor. He would not allow her to be dragged through the mud and hurt again. "He's using you to get to me," Elias said to Eleanor, his voice filled with frustration. "He knows I won't let him hurt you." "And I won't let him take your ranch," Eleanor replied, her eyes filled with a new kind of fire. "We'll fight him." Their strength came from a united front. Elias and Eleanor began to prepare for the legal battle, gathering old land deeds, consulting with a sympathetic lawyer from a neighboring town, and gathering testimonies from the few honest men who had witnessed Vance's shady dealings. The struggle was exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and growing anxiety, but through it all they were a team. Elias handled the legal maneuvering, and Eleanor was the emotional rock, a source of unwavering support. She organized their records, she kept a clear head when Elias's temper flared, and she was a comforting presence to Lily, who felt the tension in the air. The courtroom was a small, stuffy room in the nearest town. It was filled with onlookers, half of them supporting Vance, the other half curious to see the outcome. Sterling Vance, dressed in a tailored suit, was a picture of false civility. Elias, in his worn but clean clothes, looked like a man of the earth. The trial began, with Vance's lawyer presenting a convoluted and dishonest case. He brought in witnesses, paid to lie, who claimed Elias had illegally acquired his land. But the most venomous part of the testimony came from Jedediah, who stood on the stand and spun a web of lies about Eleanor, claiming she was a fortune-hunting woman who had manipulated Elias. Eleanor sat beside Elias, her hand in his. She could feel the stares, the whispers. The public shame she had felt months ago threatened to consume her, but this time she wasn't alone. She looked at Elias, at his strong, stoic face, and she knew she had to be brave, not just for herself, but for him and Lily. When it was her turn to testify, Eleanor walked to the stand with her head held high. She spoke not of Elias's virtues, but of her own truth. She described her past, her heartbreak, and the moment a small girl reached out to her in the midst of a cruel storm. She spoke of how Elias had offered her not just a home, but a chance to be a human being again. "My home isn't a house," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "It's the love of a good man and his daughter. The rest of you can say what you want. But to us, it's perfect." Her testimony, filled with raw honesty and quiet dignity, moved even the most cynical onlookers. It was not a plea for sympathy, but a statement of truth. The courtroom was a small, stuffy room in the nearest town, heavy with the weight of expectation. Everyone present, the curious, the skeptical, and the few who held a genuine interest in justice, watched as Judge Thompson, a man known for his stern demeanor and sharp intellect, delivered his verdict. He had listened to Sterling Vance's intricate but flimsy legal arguments and watched as Jedediah spun a tangled web of malice and lies. But it was Eleanor's testimony, her simple, unvarnished truth, that had truly cut through the noise. This court finds the plaintiff, Mr. Sterling Vance, has failed to present any compelling or factual evidence to support his claim, the judge declared, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. On the contrary, the testimonies presented by Mr. Thorne's witnesses, and particularly the deeply affecting account of Ms. Eleanor Vance, paint a clear and compelling picture of the truth. This land belongs to Mr. Elias Thorne, and this court will not stand for a baseless attempt to strip a man of his rightful property. A quiet gasp rippled through the room, followed by a low murmur of approval. The verdict was final. It was more than a legal victory. It was a powerful vindication of integrity over greed and of genuine human connection over cynical manipulation. Sterling Vance's face, usually a mask of smug arrogance, contorted into a mask of pure rage. He slammed his hand on the table, but a sharp look from the judge silenced him. He stormed out of the courtroom, his defeat a bitter public humiliation. Jedediah, who had thought to earn Vance's favor with his lies, found himself completely abandoned. A few people openly laughed at his pathetic figure as he slunk out of the courthouse, his reputation in tatters, a testament to the fact that truth, no matter how long it takes, always has a way of revealing itself. As Elias, Eleanor, and Lily walked out of the courtroom, they were met with an unexpected sight. Instead of the usual jeers and stares, they were greeted by the silent nods of a few townsfolk, then by a few more, until a small group had formed, clapping softly. It wasn't a roar of applause, but it was something far more meaningful, a quiet acknowledgement of their courage and resilience. The tide had turned. The people of the town had seen the truth. They had seen the genuine nature of Elias and Eleanor's bond, and it had forced them to re-examine their own prejudices. Back at the ranch, the air felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from the valley. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the fields, and the distant mountains seemed to stand in silent celebration. Elias, Eleanor, and Lily stood on the porch, looking out at the land that was now truly and irrevocably theirs. Lily, in her typical childlike innocence, ran to Elias and hugged his leg. "We won, Daddy, we won!" she exclaimed, her voice full of pure joy. "We did, sweetheart," Elias said, bending down to hug her tightly. He then stood up and wrapped his arm around Eleanor's waist, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice low and filled with emotion. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. "I was thinking about that day in the saloon," she said softly. "I thought my life was over. I thought I was nothing. But then Lily took my hand, and you saved me." Elias looked down at his daughter, who was now chasing a butterfly near the porch steps. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. "She's perfect, isn't she, Daddy?" Lily had said that day. And she was. He turned to Eleanor, his gaze steady and filled with a depth of feeling she had never seen before. "I didn't save you," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You saved me, you and Lily. You showed me what a real home is, not just a place, but a feeling, a place where you're safe, a place where you're loved, a place where you're perfect just the way you are." He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw a future not of a broken bride, but of a strong, loving woman, with a family built on courage, resilience, and an unwavering, authentic love. The sun set, painting the sky in a final, glorious display of color, signaling not an end, but a new, beautiful beginning.